Hello, everybody. Well, as Ben said, I am Charlie Triplett. I'm on LinkedIn way more than I ought to be. I'm pretty easy to find there. Let's dig in. If you know my work or have seen it, I wrote the book on accessibility.com. It's an online guide to building enterprise accessibility programs. It is not a particularly exciting read, but if you're into technical governance, it's pretty good stuff. I maintain atomicaccessibility.com. It's a reference of acceptance criteria for basically anything you want to build for web, iOS, Android, and also design requirements. So it's we'll talk more about that later. I also contributed to the design systems chapter for design for accessibility, a practical guide to digital accessibility, UX, and inclusive web and app design. So go pick that up on Amazon or on pact.com, which was our fantastic publisher. I'd never really written for print before. It was an experience. I will probably do that again someday. I think it was pretty neat. In my free time, I enjoy traveling with Truman the Tiger. This little guy is the mascot of the University of Missouri. That's where I graduated with a BFA in graphic design. I didn't learn to code until much later in my career. Don't tell the engineers. My experience in product development is really covering a weird and wide gamut. Most of my career was spent as what I would describe as a UX engineer, UX designer. I built conversion-oriented, SEO-optimized websites that delivered results in higher education, fintech, lots of different spaces, and consulted in a lot of different spaces as well. In my free time, I do go chasing waterfalls. Sorry, TLC. That's a Gen X joke for you. This is what I do during the summer. I help teach a course in swiftwater canyoning if you want to come out to Seattle. This is a great team adventure sport. Specifically, this is me in Davis Creek. That is an 80-foot waterfall followed by a 40-foot waterfall. That is just one of my favorite places in the world. When I'm not dangling from ropes, I'm busy being a New Yorker, spending time with my distractingly pretty wife who's here tonight. Nerding out over architecture. If you recognize that window shape, you might know what building that is. And just finding joy in the little things in life that you find along the way, especially when googly eyes are involved. For those that can't see me, I am yet another middle-aged white guy with a beard working in tech. I'm on the LinkedIn with a profile that sounds more like legal compliance than design or engineering nerd. But really what that all amounts to is this. I am really focused on building accessibility programs that the enterprise would miss if it disappeared tomorrow. I think that's what we're really called to do in this space at the enterprise level. And tonight, we're gonna cover the concept of acceptance criteria and how to turn every Jira ticket into your accessibility policy. Alternative titles to this talk would include how to do accessibility with, not at, teams, or why it's not about creating a new, fresh accessibility mindset, or why can't they just use WCAG? I will tell you. I probably used to say this. Who's responsible for accessibility? Everybody. Okay, when we say that in the accessibility space, or to any room, about anything, there's a great wave of relief that sweeps across everybody present, because we all know that if everybody's responsible, nobody is responsible. Listen, everyone is part of a team, unless you're dealing with some like lone wolf 10x engineer that's working out of his basement. Software development is, like canyoning, a team activity. Everyone has a specialized role, and not everyone is responsible for everything. That is why they were given a job, is because there was a role to fill, like product manager, developer, designer, QA. And they said, yeah, I'm good at that. And they said, okay, well, come on in here. We'll give you money to do that. And so, you know, we kind of get to this point where like, okay, well, people have different roles, but they just need to have an accessibility mindset while they do it. And that's true, that's not wrong, and I've probably said this too, but it's not helpful because I can't measure mindset. I cannot measure mindset. And people don't come to work to mindset, they come to work to work. So if we work with that and use the tools that already exist, I think we can make some really big progress in the accessibility space. And so let's talk about what I mean by that. I was very fortunate in my accessibility career early on. I was taken aside by a very wise product manager named Eric Boyson. And he said, look, Charlie, long pause. He gave it a long pause. The currency on which modern software is built is the Jira ticket. If it's in the Jira ticket, it gets built. And I thought about that for a long time. Because how do I get accessibility into every Jira ticket? I don't know. I also thought about this quote a lot from Buckminster Fuller, a futurist who was just years, decades ahead of his time. He said, you can't change the way people think. All you can do is give them a tool, the use of which will change their thinking. I thought about that a lot. And I began to realize, there already is a mindset. There already is a tool that's available to us. The mindset is agile. The tool is Scrum. Product owners already set big picture product goals. That already happens. That's a tool. It's not just a process, it's a tool that teams use. Designers and dev teams already have this thing called team agreements. That is basically their understanding of how they work. That is a tool. We can use that tool. Every feature that's added to your digital product has acceptance criteria, and we're going to talk about that a lot tonight, to ensure that everyone understands the assignment. Okay, that is another tool we can use. After they add that feature, they do demos before they ship it to make sure that the work is complete. That is another tool that we can use. I could give a talk about each one of these steps. But like I said, tonight we're going to specifically zero in on acceptance criteria. Now I'm going to say something here, and I'll look at the ceiling while I say it. So you know that I'm not looking at anybody in particular. But if you're an accessibility expert and you kind of eschew dealing with Agile or Scrum and all those meetings, you're really missing out. Much of the time, the reason why teams don't understand accessibility or incorporate it into their work is because we don't understand teams. So please don't be someone who says, oh, I don't get all that Scrum stuff. It's so many meetings. It's just a lot of meetings that I don't want to be in and deal with. Well, let's dive into some of these things I just talked about. The concept of a team agreement is super, super important. I want to emphasize, I'm going to talk about acceptance criteria, but it is not a magic bullet. There are other things that are involved here. And one of those things is team agreements that are very helpful. If you're unfamiliar with team agreements, I can't explain the whole thing, but it's basically how the team works, what hours they're working, what is the culture they're trying to achieve. But it also includes something called a definition of ready and a definition of done. Team agreements are not gates, okay? They're just a way a team communicates about how they work. So that definition of ready can include, hey, we consider a project ready to work on when it has accessibility acceptance criteria. We consider it to be ready to work on when the Figma design has annotations for accessibility. We consider it to be ready to work on when the product goals are inclusive. If those three things aren't met, we're not ready to work on it. Definition of done can include that, hey, it's not done until we've demonstrated that this is accessible. Teams can agree up to that. That's a really powerful tool. So let's talk about acceptance criteria and user stories. What are they? They're just a story, a structured way of telling the story of what success looks like for the end user, for people. And we're all about people. This is where we should live. Acceptance criteria are the way that we can help teams understand what success looks like for people using assistive technology, or just settings on their devices that we consider accessibility settings. So Here's a common structure of a user story. As a customer, I want to add items to my shopping cart so that I can review and complete my purchase. Okay, that's a very big picture user story. Everyone can wrap their heads around this. Everybody can look at this, everybody from the product team in the room, and say, okay, let's talk about how we make this true. And as part of that conversation, we're going to recognize that, hey, there's other things that have to happen here. Well, the designer's got to design, the UI dev's got to dev, the JavaScript engineer's got to JavaScript, the QA is going to QA. Like, we have to have all of these other tasks. The reason why story criteria works so well is because it helps us agree on what success looks like in a testable way. There's no ambiguity about this. Now, who's responsible for writing user stories or acceptance criteria? It's not everybody. It's the product owner. Maybe where you're at, that's a flavor of like product manager. Sometimes this is a little bit flexible, but largely there is someone who's responsible for writing acceptance criteria. In traditional Scrum, that's the product owner. They use acceptance criteria to communicate what success looks like and how to hold their team accountable for completing that. Who's responsible for fulfilling the acceptance criteria? Well, that's your designers and your UI developers. Again, not everybody. So now let's get into real acceptance criteria. So we have our user story format over here that we looked at earlier. So as some type of user, I want some sort of functionality so that I get some benefit. There's also Gherkin acceptance criteria. These are also often called like behavioral driven development. Thank you. And they follow this format. Given that something is true, when I do something, then this other thing happens. This is testable and unambiguous. So let's look at how this works in practice. That UI dev ticket for that shopping cart button starts with the user story, and the user delivers a Figma file. It usually looks like that. They've got an add to cart default state, and they have a hover state. And everybody in this room knows what's missing from that design. There's some states that are missing from this button. So we can start with this idea of, given that I'm on a product page, when I click the add to cart button, I see the cart icon quantity is updated, and when I view my shopping cart, I see the item has been added to the cart. Okay, that's pretty good stuff for someone using a mouse. There is no reason why these criteria cannot include criteria for accessibility. So what if we include keyboard accessibility criteria in this? Given that I'm on a product page, when I use the tab key to move focus to the button, I see focus is strongly visually indicated. Huh. Okay, so if I'm the UI dev and I get this criteria, I have a problem, don't I? I realize, well, there's no indication from the designer what that focus state looks like. And now our engineer has to go talk to the designers and find out, hey, what do you want for the focus state on this? You didn't give me a focus state. Okay, well, that's pretty neat. That's super helpful. That got people talking to each other about accessibility. And importantly, the accessibility expert didn't have to be in the room for that. Okay, the team achieved some level of self-sufficiency by talking to each other and having some basic requirements. In fact, you can add screen reader acceptance criteria to this. So we can take this same story, we can add screen reader acceptance criteria. You know, I want to hear that the purpose of that button is clear. I want to hear that it identifies its role as button. When I use the spacebar or the enter key, I see the intended action occurs, right? Let's keep going. There's no reason why they can't be criteria for mobile screen reader. We could do device settings. So plenty of people increase the text size on their phone. And the designer didn't think about what happens when we enlarge the text. So your developer has to, again, go talk to the designers and ask, hey, we have this requirement here. What happens if the text is enlarged by 200%? And your designer has to deliver that. Just magically appears. And again, no accessibility expert had to be there for that. It occurs as a natural result of the designer and the developer talking to each other. What happened there is that the product owner, the developer, the designer, they all became somewhat self-sufficient without the accessibility team chasing them and saying, hey, you need focus states for these buttons. Hey, you need to figure out what happens when this hits 200% in large text. We use the tools that they're already using. They're already using acceptance criteria to change their thinking, and we didn't have to be there for it. I will tell you, in practice, it takes about a quarter for a team to get really, really self-sufficient at this. But once they hit that point, they start reaching out only with the really interesting questions. You don't get questions about, hey, does a link activate with the space bar? Or is it, the enter key? Or what happens for a checkbox? You don't get those kinds of basic questions anymore. You start to answer really interesting questions where life gets ambiguous. I really believe we don't need more AI in accessibility. We just need ACs. The reason why, I love this analogy, the reason why acceptance criteria work is because it forces people to communicate in a very testable way. It's like if you were trying to record a song and everyone is recording it remotely in their own separate room, but you don't tell the drummer what the words are to the song. And so they just go full head metal on the song because they didn't know that it was a love song, okay? Acceptance criteria let people talk to each other. They let them become self-sufficient. Now, you might be looking at this acceptance criteria and saying, oh, this is great. I'm gonna start putting WCAG in every Jira ticket. Then they'll learn WCAG, and that is a win-win-win. And I wanna be honest with you, that is not gonna work. Because becoming a WCAG expert is a different job than the one they have. Okay, the room hasn't revolted yet. Just give it a minute. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are not acceptance criteria. It's a specification of abstracted principles in the form of success criterion that require an expert to interpret, okay? So if I asked in this room an opinion about a particular success criterion out of WCAG, if I ask 3 people, I will get 9 opinions, okay? You can't do that with devs. You can't do that with the designers. Don't believe me, I'll prove it. If I search all of WCAG and I just want to find out how a button works, does a button activate with spacebar or enter key or both? You cannot find that in WCAG. You can find principles, but there's no specific criteria on how it should work. So we looked at an example of acceptance criteria for keyboard and screen reader. You can't expect every product owner to write accessibility acceptance criteria. And it's not sustainable for you to be there in the room to write from scratch acceptance criteria for every single story across every single project across every single enterprise. So for our purposes, let's look at where we can get acceptance criteria. You can strip them out of the ARIA authoring practices guide. The APG has the foundation for most of this. Let's look at a demo of doing that with atomic accessibility. There are a couple of other tools that are out there. Here we go. So first of all, you gotta figure out what you're making. We're talking about that button in our shopping cart. So there are entries here for just about everything you'd wanna make. We can select the button criteria. Here's everything. So keyboard, screen reader, mobile screen reader, device settings. I can copy this. And from here, I can put this into whatever project management system you're using. There's no rocket surgery here. It's really just copy and paste into your project management system. Maybe that's Jira, maybe that's something else. Maybe you're just in Trello. Maybe it's in some other format, but it just doesn't matter. The criteria work wherever people are doing their job. And that's it. Like, now it's in the Jira ticket. Now the team is responsible for completing that work. So, as I said before, if you ask 3 accessibility experts, you'll get 9 opinions. So this next exercise may be a mistake, but we're gonna try it anyway. Let's pick some acceptance criteria. So let's say you see something like this that says submit at the end of a form. Anybody who, what kind of component do we think this is on web? We're on web. I got a couple hands up here in front. That's right. This is definitely a button. And we can put the how to test a button criteria in any story where they're making a form with a submit button. All right. What about this? So we've got a little group here. We have a thing that takes you to a terms and conditions page. And there's a thing here that lets you agree to something that you definitely, scrolled respectfully. What components do we have here? I got a hand over here. Yeah. What do we got over here? We got hyperlink and checkbox. Yeah, I'd buy that. How to test a link, how to test a checkbox. Amazing. Again, these criteria can be pasted into the Jira story. Okay, what about this? Ooh. What is your favorite coffee roast? So there can be only one. There's three things here. What might we want this to be?
Your radio list.
Ah, that's right. I was hoping somebody would say it was a button, and then we could get into an extended argument about, ARIA pressed or ARIA, but no, you could totally make this out of a radio button and style radio buttons to look like this. They look like buttons, but they should be coded like radio buttons. So this is one of those spaces where if you're helping a team through understanding acceptance criteria, you have to walk them through this because they will choose buttons, right? Like they will look at this and be like, oh, well, these look like buttons in the Figma file, so therefore I need the criteria for buttons. And now they're in trouble because they're going to forget to put states or focus or something on those buttons when they could just make it radio buttons. All right. So this crowd is a little bit too smart so far. What about this? Pick your preferred days, plural. Again, they look like buttons. Checkboxes. I heard checkboxes out there. All right. Survey says checkboxes. All right. So what I've illustrated is one, here's what acceptance criteria do for you in terms of scaling your efforts. Right? If you have accessibility acceptance criteria in your Jira tickets, it keeps you out of this constant state of chasing people down, of looking at every single Figma file and saying, oh no, they don't have focus states. Oh no, they didn't think about what happens when we enlarge the text. The team starts to figure that out on their own, and it's really, really beautiful to watch. Our teams that we work with in the product space want to do good work, but they need that laid out for them in a format they understand and in a way that they're familiar with. And I also wanted to show you just the pitfall of it, which is you do have to hold their hand. You do have to talk them through, like, what is this component? What should we choose here? Because it's very easy to choose the right thing. You will have people who don't understand, especially product owners, the difference between a heading and a header, right? You have to lay that out for them. But once they get that locked in, they've got it. And after about a quarter, those teams start to become really self-sufficient. And they start to come to you with the more interesting questions. They begin to understand the principles rather than just memorizing that thing that you told them that one time and then misapplying it. So, thank you for listening to me ramble on about acceptance criteria. Happy to answer questions. The M-Train isn't going anywhere anytime soon, so I am here and I'll be hanging out for a little while. We got a question. I see some raised hands. Okay. You, sir, in the back.
So thank you for the training tonight. You had said in your presentation that this was like building accessibility cultures that companies would miss. So if you were to institute this at Verizon, who had an accessibility culture and is apparently dismantling it, what could they learn to keep it going? Because it seems like they're tearing down their accessibility culture that was in the process of being made.
Oof, yeah. We are in an ugly period in tech. There are a lot of layoffs, downsizing, reorgs. I know people who have been laid off. I know people who have been reorged into something that was no longer accessibility related. And so if I understand the question correctly, it's how to rebuild or keep a program going. It's interesting. I did a survey last year of about 100 accessibility experts who had been laid off or experienced job loss in some way. When a program is part of product, or especially if you are like, specifically housed within, like, say, the design group or the dev group, it is much more likely that the team is going to completely cease to exist during a time of layoffs or budget cuts. When a team is part of a governance body within the enterprise, it's much more likely that it will stick around. There will still be some changes or reorgs, but the program is much more likely to survive. So in terms of rebuilding a program, I view accessibility as very much a governance program. When it's housed within product or design, it's easy to fall into the trap, I think, of being a help desk or a service desk sort of program, which is impactful work, but you have to be able to show results that the enterprise wants to see. So that was 1,000 words to come back around to. I think you have to sit down and say, okay, well, how do we show that we are doing something effective that the enterprise would miss if it went away completely? And there's lots of ways to do that. But for every enterprise, that's going to be different. But showing the value of your work is something that you have to do. Like all these product teams, they show the value of their work. They have to explain, we added this feature to our product line. It generated XYZ income and cost us this much, and it did this for the company. That is, I think, where it gets real hard to do in accessibility, but there are ways to show that we are making impact.
Thank you. I'm gonna read a question from online, and then we're gonna go back to our audience. So, is there a recommended format for citing a design system component that has already met its own acceptance criteria?
So for citing I'm not sure I understood the question. So is there a preferred format for citing, CITE, citing? Mm-hmm. A design?
Something that passed.
Right. It has already met.
I'm inferring that means something that met the acceptance criteria, mm-hmm. but still has some issue with it. So implementation met the ACs, and yet there's an accessibility issue discovered after implementation. So you can look at the ACs and say, like, well, it passed that, uh-huh. but there's something else wrong with it. I think that's how I'm interpreting that question.
Yeah, I'll do my best to misunderstand the question. So it sounds like what they're saying is that they had a design system. Let me try to reverse engineer this. They had a design system component. They included acceptance criteria for its development, and yet there were still problems with that component. I think that's how I can interpret it. So if you have developer teams who are ignoring acceptance criteria in the Jira story, you no longer have accessibility problems, right? That's not an accessibility problem. That is a problem where the developers are ignoring the acceptance criteria and the product owner is not holding the team accountable for meeting those criteria. And as accessibility experts, we have to be sure that we're not trying to solve the wrong problem. Because if you try to solve organizational problems as the accessibility person and step out of your lane in that way, uninvited, that can get ugly really, really fast for you. So that's a place where diplomacy, I think, is required. and talking to people like, hey, it seems like we have a different problem here. How can we get on some better Scrum practices?
Okay, so my inference was totally wrong. They've followed up in the chat.
Okay, I still like my answer.
I thought it was great. Different question though, apparently. He says, a Jira epic can have an acceptance criteria that all of its features are conformant with WCAG, which is...
that doesn't work.
But then citing as in referencing a story to a previous story. New story, new acceptance criteria. That criteria refers to a design system component and not net new from scratch criteria. New story, new acceptance criteria. That criteria refers to a design system component and not net new from scratch criteria.
Yes.
I'm going to recommend that I'm going to recommend that
let's put it out to the crowd.
Contributor here reach out because I'm unfortunately, I apologize. I'm having. You might be right. Wait.
Okay, so the speculation can continue.
Yes.
So what I think he means is like actually using the correct design system component is the solution to the problem, and it is good, and you should use it. And what's the formalized language for saying use the design system component in this case for this interaction? The question almost answers itself, doesn't it? It's like, just use this component.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And so perhaps you can clarify again, but as long as I have the mic, and as long as we're talking about design systems, and you've written a chapter in the book.
I did.
Why don't you give us some more thoughts and notions about best practices of the best friends of accessibility and design systems, BFFs?
Oh. Yeah, that's a separate talk. Let me just say, like, if there's one truth that I try to tell people about design systems, we deliver the design system. We don't tell people the intent of the components within it, and that's usually what is missing. And that's why you get these weird, like, well, we would sure like to use and build some other custom component, and it's because they don't understand the intent of checkboxes, radio buttons, selects, those sorts of things. They think that, like, well, those are for something else. I have this grand intention. To me, design systems are not delivered with enough context about the intent for the components that are being delivered in the artifact. That's all I have to say about that.
Perfect. Okay. Let's get to the next online question, and then we're going to go back to the audience. Right? What you want? Sorry. Oh yeah. We got.
They confirmed your interpretation was what they were trying to ask. Nice job, Aaron. Thank you very much.
Okay. How is accessibility defined and approved? Success criterion for designers and developers when healthcare systems involve complex workflows and large volumes of data. Will design system help address that?
Well, I mean, a design system helps by people not repeating the same work over and over again and increasing the surface area for errors to creep in. Like, that's what a design system really does for you, is it should make things faster, cheaper, less error prone. But it's important to understand when acceptance criteria get placed in, like, you do not find a Jira story, at least you shouldn't find a Jira story that is like, build the shipping, or build the entire product display page, right? That's not a Jira ticket, okay? A Jira ticket is, hey, let's add the add to cart button. Okay, let's add the carousel of pictures. Let's create the taxonomies and brand logos. So you can't apply acceptance criteria to, like, en masse to, like, a huge like template level place. Like that ticket shouldn't exist. That's how I'm interpreting it anyway. Did I answer the wrong question again? I sure hope so.
I think that aligns.
Yeah, I mean, again, like if people are putting like entire customer journeys into like a single Jira ticket, and I don't mean an epic, but like a single Jira ticket, you don't have accessibility problems. You have people who don't understand agile, and that's a different problem to solve.
Cool. Thank you. All right.
Thank you. This is very exciting, and I'm looking forward to bringing this to product teams. This seems very tempting to people who want to use AI for something. When someone says this, yeah, of course we'll put accessible acceptance criteria, we'll get AI to do it. What, if any, cautions should we all be prepared to respond back with?
So, oh gosh, okay. Let me start this sentence and try to make it one sentence and see where it ends up. So, like the large language models that we have been trained on garbage data, right? Everybody in the room understands that like AI goes out and looks at every website, and if you ask it, hey, how do I make a shopping cart, it goes and collects all the bad ideas and puts them into its code. Unless you tell it, make it accessible, and then it puts fewer bad ideas in there, but then it also throws in some ARIA you didn't need. Likely, I don't know, the GPT 5.2 is actually getting pretty stinking good. So yes, I don't see a reason why that wouldn't work good enough. Right? That's what AI does for you, is it says, well, this is good enough. And to scale this very quickly, if you're not in a position to coach, show up to teams during their sprint refinements and say, hey, show me your acceptance criteria that you're building out this week. Yep, that's good, that's good, that's good. Okay, well, no, it's a heading, not a header. Then I think AI can probably do that pretty good enough. But it will require a lot of system prompts that tell it where to look for its source of truth. Because if it takes the whole of the internet and tries to do that, it's going to do a pretty mediocre job. That was like 4 sentences, I'm sorry.
That's great.
All right, we got behind you there.
I'll just say that is something that we're experimenting with known good data sources as context for MCP servers, with something like Cursor to assist a product manager in defining those criteria, and training an agent on those criteria with guardrails and checks and like quality checks in place to make sure that the things that it's coming out with are actually valid. But it's not unviable, but you just have to have, you still got to have the human close to the machine with eyes on to make sure that it trust and verify.
Human in the loop.
Or don't trust and verify. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this. I have actually 2 questions. I think one of them was actually answered in the previous questions, but I think most of the presentations around how to build accessibility based on like component level, and it's super achievable like for design system team. And also, as you said, most of the team, they like break out the task by like component, like let's build up this component first. But my question is like for non-design system team who is like using design system, whether the criteria will just become, just don't detach the components or like just use the design system components, and the acceptance criteria like further evolve when there's customization you made in a really complex flow. Let's see, we want to add something extra functionality based on the existing component, and that become a separate criteria that this team can think of, but most of other is already was already covered by the design system team.
So if I understand the question, it's are you asking when you have variations in the design system?
Yeah, I'm asking I can see this being really helpful for like design system team who is like developing the whole design system from scratch and developing the tickets based on the component level.
Sure.
But I'm
Yeah.
like asking like for the day-to-day development for other like design for other development team who is like using the design system, whether this criteria will like vary.
Oh, absolutely. So yeah. So I have both used this acceptance criteria model for building out whole design systems, like multiple times, and it works really well at that level. And it works well for the individual product team that is consuming the components out of the design system. We like to think, and I know I did when I created, with a team of other people, the perfect design system, and we did it. Did they still produce things that were horribly inaccessible somehow, like by perverting our code in some interesting way? Of course they did, and it was web components. How can you even do that with a web component? So all that to say, this has the greatest impact at that product team level. The people who are consuming the design systems components, they still need acceptance criteria, even for accessibility, because they can configure those acceptance criteria in a way that is inaccessible, that destroys the meaning and intent of those components. And it happens all the time. I had a slide that I didn't bring in here, but we like to think of design systems as Legos. And we have this beautiful vision where we have this beautiful set of Lego blocks, and look, they can build a beautiful castle with the Lego blocks. They can also build a really ugly castle with the Lego blocks. So again, that gets back to that thing I said earlier about explaining the intent of the components. So many designers and developers they simply do not understand the intent, that intent layer between the user and the components. They're just making a thing that looks like a website to them. And without acceptance criteria that express the intent and what success looks like for the end user, they can still do horrible things with the design system. I mean, we've all seen it, but yeah.
Thank you.
I think we have just a few minutes for the last question. I saw a hand.
Thank you so much. And also thank you for the great chapter in the Inclusive Design for Accessibility book. I guess sort of just to end on a think piece, you mentioned that once all of these acceptance criteria are done, people actually start asking some very interesting questions, like ambiguous questions. Can you give us examples of what kinds of questions people have asked?
Oh yeah, so, and I might not have explained that well, but when you're the accessibility person, you get the same questions all day, every day. How does a checkbox work? Yes. Hey, does a checkbox activate on the Enter key or on the C key? Like, should headings get focus? Should each section in the website get focus? Should every paragraph get focus? You get these questions, like, where do I add tab index to this paragraph? And why do I need to add ARIA labels to every single heading? You get those questions all the time. And what acceptance criteria do is they allow your knowledge as accessibility expert to scale. When people have the basics covered, when they know that okay, this is how a checkbox operates, this is how a heading operates, those questions start to go away, and you start to get really good questions like, hey, we have a multi-step customer journey that goes from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. These are all separate pages. Is that a link or a button for clicking continue? Should it be a link because they're going to a separate page, or is it a button because it's all part of the same form? You start to answer questions about that, and that's really much more interesting than saying, no, headings don't receive focus with the keyboard. Please stop doing that.
Cool.
It depends. Is it inside of a form?
Okay, in a form.
In a form, yes, I would say it is a button. But if it's just going from like page to page, I would say that it's a link. If it goes somewhere, it's a link. If it does something, it's a button. Technically, you are kind of going somewhere, but you're going somewhere within the context of the form, so that's doing something. Yeah.
I have a friend who also works in accessibility, and they have a button that says "not a link." And I love this pun. All right, thank you so much. I'm gonna go. Oh.